Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video, where the topic of this video is going to be Quad Remesher. Now, I asked a question a couple of weeks ago on the community tab in the YouTube channel, and the majority of you guys said that you would like to see me cover this topic, and I was actually surprised that a lot of you did not even know what it is. So, that's what we're here to see today. What is Quad Remesher and how does it work? Well, first of all, Quad Remesher is a plugin for 3ds Max that really helps you model faster. And the way you can get it is just go down to exosite.com, and in here, once you're here, they have a couple of different plugins. You want to go over to Quad Remesher, just click over here, and it's going to tell you that it is available as a plugin for 3ds Max, Maya, Modo, Blender, Houdini, Cinema 4D. So if you're using any of these softwares, you can use this plugin. So I'm going to go back to 3ds Max, and now let's see how this thing works. Once you install the plugin, you have an option to basically put it on a hotkey, or what I've done is I've actually made a key over here, or just a button, so when you press it, this is what pops up. Now, the way that Quad Remesher works is very similar to if you've ever used ZBrush and there you've used the Z Remesher option. So what that option does is it will basically take whatever you have as a geometry and try to make it quadrified, or all quads. Now, let's see how that thing would work inside 3ds Max. So let's start off with a simple box in here. There we go. And let's create a smaller box, or let's just create a copy of this. There we go. Make it smaller like this. And for this one, let's just take a pro boolean, subtract this, and just make a cut like this. There we go. So also let's try to give it a bit more complex geometry, so let's add in one extra cylinder in here. So let's go from the center, something like this. Give it a height. There we go. May just scale it upwards. So something like this down these lines. I'm actually gonna scale this thing downwards like this. There we go. Something like this would work. Now, before I actually do go ahead and continue with the compounding for the pro boolean, I want to do a union, but make sure that when you're going to be using Quad Remesher, you have quite a bit of geometry to help drive the shape. In this case, I'm actually going to, I have 64 sides on this cylinder, so that should be enough. Yeah, but if we had something like the 16 that we generally start off with the cylinder, this could end up being a problem. So for now, I'm actually going to amp this thing to 64. And now we're going to take a union between these two and make it into one. There we go. So now, if we would like to continue modeling on top of this, it would be kind of difficult, mainly because, well, there is a lot of n-gons in here. So it's not really the ideal model to start or continue modeling with this. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this into editable poly. And now this is where Quad Remesher really shines. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to make a few copies of this. So I'm going to hold down Shift, create a few copies so we can see the difference. Let's try 5 copies. Always try to make a copy when you're about to do the Quad Remesher, although it's not going to be too big of a problem because every time it does the remeshing, it will hide the original mesh. But it's just okay so you can see the difference. Now I'm going to select the first model over here, and the only thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to decrease the target quad count to something like 500. Now, just so we can see it even better, I'm going to go ahead, open up my statistics, total plus selection, and just click apply and OK. Now, when I press the 7, it's going to actually give me some information as to how much geometry I have in this scene. So at the moment, this thing has 26 polygons or 48 vertices. So what I'm going to do is, again, turn this thing down to 500, click on remesh. I'm not going to change anything else, just remesh. It will take a few seconds, it will do the calculations, and right away it's going to spit out a model that is going to be more or less in line with what we just put in here. So we put in 500, and I can see that in here my selection has 518 polygons. And if I just isolate this, you're going to see that it's all quadded up. If I turn off, by pressing F4, I turn off the edge, you can see that this thing looks pretty clean. No issues whatsoever. But now, let's take a look at another option here. If I take a look at this left side and compare it to this right side, we're going to see that we have a bit of a different geometry. And even though it's more or less the same geometry on both sides, the way that these edges go are a bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to change anything else in here, but I know that in here, as I can see on the y-axis, this thing is symmetrical. So in the miscellaneous thing here, I'm going to check on symmetry on the y. And I'm going to click on remesh again. I'm not going to change anything else. So hit remesh. Give it a few seconds to do the calculations again. And there we go. Right away, now I can see that the left side is the same as the right side. So the geometry is going across. It's all quadded up. So if I use a turbo smooth, it's going to work perfectly. Even though if I put on the smoothing groups, there we go. We have perfect geometry. And this can really help expedite things when you're just kit bashing things and you want to have rapid development on whatever that you're working. So what are the other options? Well, let's see. Here we have adaptive quad count. Now, what this thing does, it basically, if you take a look at these, you're going to notice that all of these polygons in here are more or less the same size. So it has no adaptability. If we turn on adaptive quad count, it will basically try to follow this shape, and if there is any need for any smaller polygons, it's actually going to put them in here. So I'm going to turn on adaptive quad count, keep symmetry in the Y, and I'm actually increase this up to 80. We're not changing the quad count again, so we're just going to hit remesh, and let's see how this thing is going to look right now. Although I still think that this has a bit too simple geometry, and even as such, it kind of encapsulates everything perfectly. So in order to see how that thing is going to look different, let's go ahead and do a bit of change on this. So I'm going to delete both of these. I'll actually take this original mesh, put it over here. And now let's add a bit more complexity on this mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut into the back and into the bottom of this thing. So let's go ahead and just create a new sphere, and pretty much I'm trying just to wing this. I don't have something set in stone as to how I want this thing to look. I'm just trying to make it so we can see the options. So if we do something weird, it just happens. All right, so something like this. Again, make sure that we have enough segments here for whatever that we're going to use. And I'm going to go again with the compound object, pro boolean, start picking, and make sure it's a subtraction, select. There we go. So now we have a big hole on the bottom. And the last thing I'm going to do is come over here. I'm going to hold down Control, right click, and drop in a line. So this line should help me draw out another, there you go, here, make these fillets, or pretty much anything for that matter. And what I want to do here with this line is just put an extrude. There we go. Make sure we have this thing going across like so. And start picking and just select it. So everything on the back side is now gone. There we go. Awesome. So now, before I actually do anything else, let's make a few copies. Again, I'm going to hold down Shift, drag out a couple of copies, try 5. And now, since we have all of this extra work that we need to do, or extra different shapes that we want to encapsulate, what we're going to have to do is increase the target quad count. For example, now it's at 500. Let's add it down to like maybe try to something like 2000 and turn off adaptive quad count and see how this thing is going to look just like this. So I'm going to hit remesh, give it a few seconds, and there we go. Right away, I can see that I got perfect score. So pretty much I was kind of hoping that something would go wrong here, but no, everything went just right. So let's try and add in a bit more details here in order to try to basically break it so we can fix it. So I'm going to select just this edge, and again I'm going to chamfer it. So there we go, we have another over here. Select this entire edge over here. Again, now we're going to chamfer this. We're going to run into a problem here with the geometry, but it's really not going to be an issue because Quad Remesher will have no problems with fixing this. So I'm going to leave it like this. And as long as the geometry looks clean, what we're actually seeing here doesn't matter. We'll see in a second though. Just want to make this thing be smooth again. So let's chamfer it again. There we go. And go something like this. Now, before I actually go ahead and do the remeshing, what I'm going to do is delete those and again just make a few copies of this. I want to address another of the options, and that is the option for which edge loop control is going to use. Now, by default, it's using detect hard edges by angle. So what this means, it will take the smoothing groups, and depending on those smoothing groups, or they're set by an actual angle, as you can see over here. But if we have certain shapes in this scene or in this model, for example, let's try and add in something in here. Maybe get some of these extruded outwards, and let's move this thing a bit to the back like this. Something down this line. I'm actually gonna go ahead, put in a couple of more edges in here. Not that way though. There we go. And something like this. Now what I want to do is, if I go ahead and just with that notch in there, I make this thing, there we go, just a couple copies. I go ahead and just hit the remesh with the hard detect edges. This is what we're going to get. Let's give it a second. There we go. As we can see, that's a bit of a problem. Now, the main reason for this happening is that since we actually extruded this thing out of this geometry, it's probably having the same exact smoothing group as the rest of it. So if you see over here, it's a smoothing group 1, and the rest of this is smoothing group 1, while these edges on the side, they don't have a smoothing group. So this is the result. As you can see over here, we have an issue. So how do we fix that? Well, quite simple. we just use smoothing groups option. I'm going to turn off this thing. And now in here, I can select which of these I would like for them to be the same smoothing group. For example, I want to have a nice slope over here. So I'm going to give them an individual smoothing group. I have this set up as a hotkey. If you want to have a way to do this manually, just select one of the smoothing groups. This here can have its own smoothing group, and this thing can have its own smoothing group. So now, since this thing is going to be following the smoothing group when it's doing the remeshing, and also what I just noticed is that now we can't use the symmetry on the Y because now it's not symmetrical. What we can do is just add a symmetry on top of this, like this. So now it's symmetrical, so we can continue using the symmetry on the Y. So let's try it. Hit remesh. And there we go. Now it's following with those smoothing groups. As you can see over here, we have a pretty good result. Everything is clean, even on the backside. Although this thing is starting to get a bit wonky now, but we can straighten those edges without a problem. And if we turn off like this, we're gonna see it's not really that big of a deal. But if it is, let's say you don't want to have something like this over here, but instead you would like to have this, keep this geometry more pristine, what we can do here in that case is, for example, we're just going to add another symmetry here on the Y, so we have this thing as it is. Put a edit poly. Again, let's just redo the smoothing groups. This one over there, this one over here is a single one, and now this whole thing is going to be the same. There we go. Now, and the other way of doing this is, instead of using smoothing groups, what we can do is we can use the adaptive quad size. We're actually going to leave the smoothing groups for now and use this adaptive to use vertex colors for the quad density. Now, by doing this, if you click this P button, it will add a vertex paint on top of this. Now, this is basically the same thing as you have in ZBrush, where you can paint in on your mesh where you would like to see the remesher give more geometry. So if we see that this place requires more geometry to hold its form, what you just go over is go over it, click, and start painting in details, or just make this thing so it has this red color. Now the red color, it will mean that this is going to get more details once it starts doing the calculations. If, for example, let's say we have more details around here, in this case I don't, we can just paint around it and that will give it more details. So let's just hit the remesh and see how this thing is going to look with this vertex colors applied. So hit remesh. And a few seconds later, we have this different result. As you can see, now the majority of the density of this geometry is placed around that reddish area. And if we had something else that had more minor details around it, we could have just painted over it, and that way we would have gotten all that information translated quite well when we're using the Quad Remesher. So with all of this said and done, I'm actually going to select everything, delete, right click, unhide all, and I'm going to get to basically reselect the originals. I'm going to delete these as well. So now, the last thing I want to show you is that you can use the Quad Remesher even when you're working with splines. And the way it works, it's you can just take a rectangle, for example, let's just test it out. A rectangle, a circle, or pretty much any shape, but let's try something like this. 2, 3, maybe 4. There we go. And I'm going to convert this into an editable spline and attach the rest of these splines to it. So now we just have this thing. Here is the interesting thing. Let me just move this thing to the side. If I'm actually going to make a copy of this thing, hold on Shift, just drag it outwards like this. If I go ahead and apply an edit poly on top of this, what is going to happen here is, if I take a look at the edges, I can visually see all of the places where I have the peaks that are holding those previous vertices, like over here. So all of these middle vertices between two vertices are from the interpolations. If I reduce the interpolation, those things are going to be even more visible. So in this case, it's using the optimized option. But like I said, when you're using Quad Remesher, make sure that every time you're using it with an ample amount of geometry to go around. So if you're going to be using it with splines, make sure you use the adaptive option. So this will make sure that whatever you're making with splines, it's always going to have the maximum amount of subdivisions it requires to hold that form perfectly. So if I go ahead and edit poly this, we're going to see that even though these two are exactly the same baseline spline, they're going to be a bit different. Namely, this is going to have these peaks and this is going to be perfect. So let's see how the Quad Remesher is going to deal with both of these. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to just reduce this thing down to 500. Turn off the adaptive. I'm not actually going to play around with the adaptive for now. We're just going to have this thing turn off the smoothing groups. Protect hard edges by angle. It's okay. We don't really need it because it's one plane. So with just this, I'm going to hit on remesh. Oh, by the way, I want to turn off the symmetry and just remesh. It will take a couple of seconds, and right away this is going to spit out a very clean geometry here. So we can basically go in here, select all of these borders, maybe scale them in, move them in like this, and if I go in and further continue, we can see that I get something like this really, really fast. Also, I can do the same thing up here, hit the remesh, and let's see the difference. Even at these very low numbers, there we go, it's really holding the shape really, really well. There we go, something like this. So at 500, we can see that it's giving it enough geometry. So let's move this into the side, unhide it all. And now let's try to lower this. I'm going to try to go as low as 100. And let's see the difference. There we go. This time you won't have the insets that we had here, but it's not a problem. So remesh. And there we go. Now we can see that it really doesn't have enough geometry and it starts breaking. So if this starts happening, then you've probably went too low. I'm pretty sure that this is going to happen in the same thing over here because it will not have enough geometry to go around. There we go. Again, the same problem with this. So if you start seeing this sort of a result, you probably went too low. So let's try another 250. And like I said, this is why you want to have different copies when you're doing this, because it's majority of the time it's going to be just like playing around and trying to find that magical number where your model is going to have as low as possible in the geometry section, but it's going to have a high enough number that it's actually going to hold the form really well. So let's try it over here. And there we go. Very, very simple and very, very fast way to get something like this. So the last thing I actually want to address or show you guys when you're doing something like this is what usually is used quite a lot, and to a lot of people this can be a problem, and that is when you have to make something that is text-based geometry. something like this. Let's just call this like this. I'm not going to change the text. I'm just going to leave it as max text. So what I'm going to do is give it a shell, something like this. And I'm going to give it like probably 2000 on the quad count, like this. So I'm not going to change anything else, just this. Detect hard edges is fine. There's no symmetry over here. Just hit remesh. And right away, we're going to get a totally clean geometry made out of quads. If you take a look at here, we have quite a lot of geometry to go around, which at the same time will allow us to add any sort of a modifier that we want. So for example, if we go over and put a bend modifier on this, we can change just the axes. There we go. We can have any sort of a text bend over whatever that you want it to bend. And there we go. The perfect solution if you have some sort of an ad or some sort of a glow neon sign that's supposed to be on top of something. So basically just take the quad remesher, hit remesh, and you can do whatever you want with this text. You can even put it on a deformer and put it on whatever surface that you might need it to be placed. So with this, we finish with the basics of the Quad Remesher and how it works. In the upcoming days, we'll probably have a few more videos showing different ways that you can use Quad Remesher, how to use it in modeling, how to use it in certain cases for photogrammetry, and that's going to be interesting to see what comes. But for now, I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something new here today. If you enjoyed the video, then click the like button, and also if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. If you would like to support me and the channel, the support links will be below in the description of the video. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.